Welcome to Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about a very troubling development. The Indian government finds itself in the same space as Al Qaeda and other criminals in the United States. An Indian government official is now on the FBI's wanted list. His name is Vikash Yadav. He's an intelligence officer and he is wanted by FBI for murder for hire. And you can see the poster that I'm sharing with you about the FBI's wanted list on which he features now. The Indian government has obviously said that he does not work for the Indian government anymore and refers to him as former employee. But it is fascinating to see that the Department of Justice continues to refer to him not as a former employee of the Indian government, as most press reports in India are reporting, but as an employee of the Indian government. So we'll talk about that more. We will ask about what's going on with this inquiry of murder for hire in the United States by Indian government officials. It is called transnational repression. And this was also discussed in the Congress a few weeks ago. So this is an important development given the significance, the strategic significance on the Indo-US relationship. So the question that I really want to ask is, where is this mess leading to? And is this going to have some kind of an impact on US-India relations? So, but before that, do subscribe to Conversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your social network and your political networks and your friends. I also want to thank you all for your support. The channel has just reached the landmark of 100,000 subscribers and has exceeded 10 million in views for a small academics YouTube channel. I'm quite happy that we have hit those benchmarks. So coming back to this discussion, the FBI has now listed Vikash Yadav as wanted for murder for hire, and they have listed him in the Department of Justice press release, which I will show you now, as a member of the Indian government. Vikash Yadav is accused of hiring a person called Nikhil Gupta, and through him trying to hire killers to kill American citizens in America. The person who was targeted is called Gurpatwant Singh Panno. He is the leader of a Sikh separatist movement in the United States. Well, the movement is supposedly in India, but he's here in the United States. From here, he advocates a separate homeland for the Sikhs in India. The Indian government has labeled him as a terrorist and accuses the Western governments of harboring terrorists and basically providing protection to terrorism. It is quite possible that the Indian government has failed to provide hard evidence to the US government or to the Canadian government about how seriously these people are, even though in the case of Canada, the Indian government has been trying for decades really to convince the Canadian government that some of the separatists or supporters of Sikh separatism are criminals and terrorists. But coming to what has happened in the United States, this is really very important because on Tuesday, a high-level inquiry committee came from India to the United States to explain to the US what had happened. So let me quickly recap to you. The United States government last year accused India of trying to kill American citizens in America using by trying to hire killers. India denied it, vociferously said this is not our policy, even though the Indian government constantly brags about it in election campaigns and otherwise. India's defense minister has said this repeatedly. India's prime minister says it often. In fact, in one statement, he said, this is my nature. Ye meri fitrat hai. This is my nature that I ghar mein ghus ke marta hoon. This is what he said in Hindi. He said, this is my nature that I enter your house and then I will kill you.
ये हमारा सिद्धांत है, हम घर में घुस के मारेंगे.
So this is a kind of a signature aspect of the Modi government, and they have cash this at the polls quite a bit. A lot of people in India find this very exciting, this whole prospect of going. Often they think it in the context of Pakistan, but when this Canadian and the US issue flared up, a lot of people in India, including the television channels and the media, were kind of celebrating it as India's new assertive phase, as India is now some kind of a major power. It can go into Canada and go into America and kill American and Canadian citizens because this is the policy of the new government. But when confronted by India, by the US and Canada, especially during the G20 summit when Trudeau and Biden met with Prime Minister Modi, the Indian government immediately declined that it did say, and said this was an accusation, this was preposterous, and this is not how Indian government functions, and so on and so forth. But when Nikhil Gupta was caught, the intermediary between the Indian intelligence agencies and killers for hire, and then he was extradited from the Czech Republic and is now sitting in a Manhattan jail, the Indian government then started cooperating with the United States and saying, okay, we will conduct an inquiry. And finally, they came up with the findings of that inquiry, which were handed over to the United States this week. According to that inquiry, the two government employees who were being accused by the United States, one was actually the head of RAW. His name is Goel, who is now retired, is no more in service. And the other person was Vikash Yadav, and the Indian government said that he's no more in the service of the Indian government. In fact, is nowhere to be found. And then the latest report that we have heard is the Indian government now claims that he's under arrest. But what is interesting is that after the Indian government made its report or discussions or inquiries here in Washington, it is after that yesterday, the Department of Justice basically came up with a press release, and I'm actually going to read some sections of the press release. They are worth reading out, and they are quite troubling, especially to say these things about the democracy. So the Justice Department announces charges against Indian government employee in connection with foiled plot to assassinate US citizen in New York City. And so the second paragraph is very powerful. This is what it says. The Justice Department will be relentless in holding accountable any person, regardless of their position or proximity to power, who seeks to harm and silence American citizens, said Attorney General Merrick Garland. So this is coming from really the highest legal authority in America. He's the super cop of the US, Attorney General Merrick Garland. He reports directly to the president. There's nobody higher than him in law enforcement in the US. And it is he's saying that we will go after anybody, no matter how close they are to proximity to power. And to me, this appears as if they are signaling that they will also go after Ajit Doval. Who else has proximity to power? Not Nikhil Yadav. Vikesh Yadav or Nikhil Gupta. So this is a very, very interesting statement. As alleged last year, we foiled an attempt by Vikash Yadav, an Indian government employee. He doesn't say former government employee, an Indian government employee, and his co-conspirator Nikhil Gupta to assassinate an American citizen on US soil. Today's charges demonstrate that the Justice Department will not tolerate attempts to target and endanger Americans and to undermine the rights to which every US citizen is entitled. So this is the statement coming from the Department of Justice. It also includes a very powerful comment from the FBI director, Christopher Wray, and this is what he says. The defendant, an Indian government employee, allegedly conspired with criminal associate and attempted to assassinate a US citizen on American soil for exercising their First Amendment rights. So the US is not conceding that Panno was a terrorist or anything else. They're saying he was just exercising his First Amendment right. He has the right to freedom of speech, and that is all he was indulging in. The FBI will not tolerate acts of violence or other efforts to retaliate against those residing in the US for exercising their constitutionally protected rights. These are really very powerful and very strong statements. These are the kind of statements the US usually keeps for rogue countries like Iran or groups such as Hamas or Hezbollah. I mean, they're using this for India. The FBI will not tolerate acts of violence from an Indian government employee. We are committed to working with our partners to detect, disrupt, and hold accountable foreign nationals or others who seek to engage in such acts of transnational repression. And I guess the partners here are Five Eyes, and hopefully also including the Indian government as a partner. So first of all, this is all very, very damaging to the Indian government. The Indian government has been lying about it consistently, constantly denying, and every time new evidence is produced, then they make it up. And now the current state is that, okay, we did this, but he's not in the government anymore. He was a rogue agent. Like, I don't understand how and why rogue agents would act in the national interest. And there are some very serious questions, like, for example, these are the kind of questions that Indian media will never really ask of their government. For example, if Vikas Yadav is no more a government employee, and if he is a rogue agent, is he still getting his pension from the Indian government? I would love to know that. Or his pension has been cancelled. Because if Indian government cancels his pension, then future Indians working for the government will not take the kind of risks Vikas Yadav did. But there's more to this, because on the Canadian side, the Indian government continues to maintain that this is not true and that Trudeau is trying to do this for political purposes, and there's not enough evidence, present the evidence to us. Apparently, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police met with Ajit Doval in Singapore for 5 hours. In which, according to the reports which are available outside in the open sources, Ajit Doval explained to them about the gangster Bishnoi, who is in one of India's jail, from which he runs a criminal enterprise. How can a criminal locked up in a jail run a criminal enterprise in which he's killing people overseas and in India? He's also now being blamed for killing a politician in Maharashtra. It cannot happen unless the Indian government is corrupt and allows him to operate that way. They allow him to communicate with people outside. They allow him to get away with it. His associates who are acting outside, both in India and overseas, are not being prosecuted by the Indian government. A lot of people, even some Indian YouTube channels and TV channels, brag about him as an Indian proxy, essentially. So the Canadian government wants to get a hang of these criminal activities because that has really permeated Canada, and because of the Canada's supposedly legal migration process, a lot of these criminal elements, especially from Punjab, have gone on to Canada, and so there is a lot of criminal activity with spies and also attempts by the Indian government to influence Canadian elections at home. But there are also other issues. This has definitely dented India's image as a force for good in the international relations. But the serious question really is it going to have an impact with how India relates? Will it have economic and diplomatic relations with Five Eyes countries, which is Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and the United States? India's attempts to sign a free trade agreement with Canada has been stopped by Trudeau more than a year ago. India's efforts to sign a free trade agreement with Great Britain has also been stymied and has not moved forward. See, India is unwilling or afraid to join multilateral free trade agreements like RCP and others, because they don't want to be in a free trade agreement where China is there, because then if they are in that group, then China's goods will simply flood the Indian market and it will hurt Indian businessmen and create unemployment in India. So India does not want to be in multilateral free trade agreements. So India wants to have one-on-one bilateral relations, and so it's trying to build up free trade agreements with Europe, free trade agreements with Britain and other places. So will this undermine that effort? India is very important for the Western countries' the China containment policy. India is very critical for the Indo-Pacific strategy. India is very critical for all kinds of defense projects and cooperation that the United States is conducting with India. What will happen to all of those projects? Already we saw attempts by US senators to stop sale of drones to India, and what is happening with the transfer of advanced jet fighter engine technology to India. Will all of that be affected by Prime Minister Modi government's so-called macho foreign policy? And this has also put a dent on India's efforts to carve a position for itself as the leader of the global South and the voice of the global South, because the US is now going to be under a lot of pressure from the United States and might have to make a lot of concessions to the US. And some of India's voting patterns in the UN, which are more like G7 rather than the global South, clearly show that India is already making diplomatic concessions to the United States. I also think that the US has used this whole India's effort to kill American citizens and Canadian citizens to, I think, reduce the capability of RAW to operate in the West. So they are, I think, going to target and diminish the capacity of Indian intelligence to operate, which means it is definitely going to have a negative impact on India's national security. And this is not just limited to just Canada and the US. A couple of years ago, Australians kicked out 4 Indians staff members at the Indian embassy. At that time, they did not let us know that they were Indians and why they were asked to leave. But more recently, the Australian government has revealed that they were Indians spying on the Indian diaspora in Australia. They were agents of the RAW and had to leave. A few years ago in Germany, a husband and wife were arrested for spying on Indians who live in Germany and spying on Germany on behalf of RAW. They were actually arrested, prosecuted, and actually went to jail. So Germany has also taken action to reduce the capacity of RAW or to go after RAW in its places. So many of these Western countries are now basically seeing that Indian government is targeting their citizens. And until in the past, they were only spying on them, but now they are trying to kill them. They are indulging in criminal homicidal activities. And so they are, I think, pushing back against India. I can't tell what will be the long-term impact on India and US relations. I do believe that India is very important. It is, this government, they may not like to work with because of its essentially, they are used to doing a lot of illegal and criminal activities. They go and bulldoze people's homes, and then they lock up the opposition, shut down human rights organizations, shut down media people, put people in jail for years and years without bail and without hearing. So even though India keeps talking about being the mother of democracy, they are doing a lot of undemocratic things at home. So that is apparent. But if India continues to do those things abroad, then the countries will be less willing to trust India as a strategic partner, especially the G7 countries, which are not only rich economies, but they are also liberal democracies. So they do value their being liberal democracy. And if they see that India is moving away from democratic principles, both at home and abroad, they will be less willing to include India in their club. So I think these are some of the dangers that India runs. This is just not that big an issue to completely undermine. But the way India has been mishandling this diplomatically, especially with Canada, I think it's quite possible it is doing more harm than what it actually did. And at some point, I think the Canadian government will reveal what it has. I also suspect that the US government has more intelligence about India's activities in Canada, and I'm sure they have ramped up their intelligence investigations on India's activities in Canada too. I'm talking about the US government. And so they must be investigating what's going on in Canada. There's obviously very close cooperation because they're members of NATO. They're NATO partners. They are Five Eyes partners. And if India government continues to deny this, I think at some point, whatever evidence that the Canadian police has will be revealed. We are confusing the lack of diplomatic handling of this issue by Trudeau as everything. I suspect that even if Trudeau loses the election, the next prime minister of Canada would listen to his police and would listen to his own intelligence people and recognize that such activities by a foreign country on their soil is detrimental to their national interest, and will definitely react in more or less the same way that Trudeau did, except they may be more diplomatic or not. So we will see. My suggestion to India is to, I've been saying this for the last one whole year, that this is not going away, this is not going away. And I find it so amazing that, well, I don't think the Indian government listens to me at all. But if those people who are interacting, sometimes they feel it is not a big deal, it didn't happen, these are false accusations, etc. No, they are not. Now you can see the faces of the culprits on wanted posters. And if this is not quickly handled to the satisfaction of the United States, I think we're going to see more of this happening. And if India retaliates in some other ways, then it will continue to have more negative relations or negative impact on India-US relations. And so we have to keep in mind that it is not just in the US interest to have good relations with India, it is also in India's interest to have good relations with the US. The US has been so helpful on the issue of China. The United States recognize India's territorial integrity with regards to Ladakh as well as Arunachal Pradesh. US has been sharing real-life intelligence with India about Chinese activities on its border, has sent clothes for the US military, for the Indian military, for winter clothes to fight in the mountains and so on. And lots of weapons and lots of technology are being transferred. There are lots of investments coming. India is hoping to become a global factory. And in order to become that global factory, it will have to attract investments from Western countries, primarily the United States and places like Canada. 30% of Canada's retirement funds are invested in India, which they moved from China. So can India afford to jeopardize all of these things just to maintain some kind of an image of the current government for domestic consumptions, because there are so many domestic elections going on? I don't know, but we shall see. Often politicians sacrifice national interests for personal political gain, and it is quite possible that both Trudeau and the Modi government are compromising the national interest of their respective countries for political gains in upcoming elections. So anyway, these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I have been on several channels all day long today in talking about these issues in Hindi. So you can go to News Time and take a look at it, or you can also go to Satya Hindi. I was on Satya Hindi last night, and I did another show today. So you can get the same content, or more or less the same content, in Hindi if you like. So I will take leave now. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Conversation, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtada Khan. Take care.